Hi everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. If you've just found this place, then welcome, and if you're returning, I'm glad to have you back. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we explore and theorycraft different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Today, we are continuing with our Frosthaven series of character builds, where we're trying to take the character classes from the board game Frosthaven and recreate them in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Since Frosthaven is a newer game compared to the rest of the Gloomhaven/Haven series, and this series of games is meant to be legacy-like, where there will be classes that are locked at the beginning of the game, there will eventually be some spoilers for other classes that we do in the series. Count this as an early spoiler warning though, as for right now, we're continuing with our starting character classes, which are all completely open knowledge. Today's build specifically, we are finishing our starting character classes with the last of our starting 6, and that is the Geminate. The Geminate is probably the most complex class of the Frosthaven starting 6, or at least on paper it looks like the most complex. In practice they're a bit smoother to grasp, but looking at them can be a little bit intimidating. The reason is because the Geminate's special mechanic is about switching forms. Instead of playing one character, you're basically playing two. They have two forms, a melee-oriented form and a ranged form. And almost every turn when you play your action cards, you will probably end up being forced to switch. There's a little icon that tells you which form to switch to. The Geminate also has a separate hand of cards for each of their forms. Now, every character class in Gloomhaven has a hand of cards, which is their stamina, and since the Geminate has two, that means that they simultaneously have the most and also least amount of stamina. They have two hands of 7 cards, which is very low in the Haven series, but if you combine them together, it's 14, which is actually the most of any character in the Haven series. Basically, all that is to say that if you were to favor one of the two forms, like you prefer melee rather than ranged, you're going to get exhausted and be out of the scenario a lot sooner than if you were to actually try to bounce back and forth between the two. In D&D terms, this isn't anything particularly new. We've done switch builds like this before, once with our Drifter, for sure at least, and that is a character that is designed to be able to switch between a melee and ranged playstyle in the middle of combat. Difference for us as the Geminate, though, is that we are forced to switch. It isn't a choice. In D&D, there isn't anything really that's going to force us into a particular playstyle, so that means that we're going to have to take it upon ourselves to try and build a character that has a little bit of a combo that they want to execute that also requires them to switch between melee and range. We're going to try and make the choice to be an active skirmisher, running into melee combat, running out of melee combat, and then also attacking at range. All within one turn, hopefully. This mechanic is the main thing that we're going to be trying to recreate with the Geminate. There are a few other things, like how they are really focused on particular elements, and they do have a few abilities that are risk and reward. They can give themselves or allies negative conditions in order to deal extra damage to enemies. We're going to worry about those later, but we're mainly focusing on being able to switch between our melee and our ranged form. Before we start the build, though, let's look at their flavor text. The Harrower Geminate. A harrower is not one single life form, but rather a swarm of thousands of insects gathered to form a hive mind intelligence. Their existence, in fact, predates all other sentient life, going back to the volatile early ages of the world. They have always maintained their distance from the operations of humans and other species, concerning themselves with their own desperate machinations. When harrowers do interact with others, they shape their swarms into a form vaguely similar to the other party, so as to minimize their discomfort. Not all harrowers, however, act as a single unit. Rarely, a swarm develops in such a way that they cannot come to a single mind. Instead, they settle into a stable equilibrium of two wills, which compete to exert influence over their collective form. The Geminate, as the phenomenon is called, will work in harmony to shift between two wildly different configurations, each with their own abilities and desires. Starting at character creation with our lineage now, we are custom lineage. We're a creature that is made up of a conscious swarm of bugs. We aren't even one consciousness, but two in this case. That is definitely going to be custom lineage if you ask me. With custom lineage, we're going to pick to be a size medium and take dark vision since they both make thematic sense. Though really, we could be small if you'd rather be small, since our form can change at a moment's notice. Then for our free feat, we are going to take Fey Touched. Fey Touched is going to give us a boost to our intelligence, since it is a half feat, and we do want our intelligence to be relatively high in this build. And we also get to choose one first level enchantment or divination spell to pick and be able to cast for free once per day, as well as with any spell slots we might get. And we also get to do the same thing with Misty Step. We just learn it, we can cast it once per day for free, and we can use our spell slots, if we get them, to cast it again. For our first level spell, picking something like Hunter's Mark or Hex is going to be mechanically pretty beneficial for us, since it's extra damage added to our attacks, and it doesn't specify whether we have to do it at range or melee, so that's a pretty nice choice. You could pick any spell from the list that you would actually like. Thematically, I also like the Fey Touched feat, as it makes us feel a little more otherworldly, since we are meant to feel otherworldly as a swarm of bugs that has 2 different hive minds within it. Looking at our stats now, after point buy, we're going to want the following array of ability scores. We're going to take 8 strength, putting 0 points into it. We're going to take 16 dexterity, putting 7 points into that in our +2 from custom lineage. We're going to put 7 points into constitution to give us 14 constitution. We're going to put 9 points into intelligence and put our +1 from Fey Touched into that to give us a 16 total intelligence score. We'll put 4 points into wisdom to give us 12 wisdom, and then we'll leave charisma with 8, putting no points into that. If you want, you can always feel free to rearrange the ability scores as you see fit. Finally, for our background, honestly, anything can really work since we're such a strange character. Outlander is probably the most fitting, admittedly, not necessarily mechanically, but thematically, since there is no way that we are a common sight in civilized society. But feel free to pick any sort of background that you think works really well for our theme. Starting into the actual level breakdown of the build now, level 1, we are going to be a fighter. Fighter is going to allow us to pick a fighting style of our choice, and we gain Second Wind, which is a nice bonus action self-heal. But really what we're interested in is the fighting style. I would recommend picking up archery to give us the first little buff to our ranged form, though if you wanted to be more generalist, then picking something like defense would work pretty well too, since that's just a flat increase to armor class. At level 2, we are Fighter 2, and here we just gain Action Surge. At level 3, we are Fighter 3, and here we get to pick our fighter subclass. We're going to go with Eldritch Knight, because Eldritch Knight gets us Weapon Bond, and Weapon Bond is what we need for the Switch build. Now, with Weapon Bond, we can have 2 bonded weapons, preferably 1 melee, 1 range, and hopefully our melee weapon has finesse, that way we can actually use our dexterity for it instead of just having to use our strength. And now we have access to a little bit of our Switch build combo. Still stuck at only 1 attack per turn, so we aren't really there yet for the full combo that we're going to want to do, but it's at least a good starting point to be able to switch pretty reliably. And we can also pick up some cantrips as well as spells. The spells can pretty much be up to you, anything that's going to be elemental in nature, as well as something that a spell sword or Gish would want, is going to be a pretty good option. For cantrips though, I'm definitely going to recommend either Green Flame Blade or Booming Blade for sure. These cantrips will be very helpful for our melee form, given that we used our fighting style to help our ranged form. At level 4, we are going to immediately jump over to Wizard. If you wanted to scale a little bit better, then going a couple more levels into Fighter to get extra attack would be fine. But we're going to jump over to Wizard and just try to race down there for a little bit, because that's going to get us a better version of extra attack that we're actually going to want. As a Wizard now, we gain Arcane Recovery, as well as a spellbook with 6 first level spells. Also, since we are a mixture of a full caster and a 1/3 caster, we are the equivalent of a 2nd level spellcaster, because we divide our fighter levels by 3, and we keep every level worth of Wizard as a spellcasting level. With the spells, since we have access to the full Wizard spell list, at least for first level spells, pick your favorites that you didn't already get from Eldritch Knight, again keeping in mind anything that's going to be elemental in nature, since that can help the element theme from the Geminate, but also anything that's going to be a little bit of an AoE, and particularly a weird AoE. See, a lot of characters in the Gloomhaven and Frosthaven series have different AoE effects that allow them to, like, cleave an enemy, or shoot out a cone, or deal damage to a full honeycomb of enemies, or even just a little triangle at, like, specific ranges. The Geminate, on the other hand, has very weird AoE effects They have some effects that like curve, or can be a giant line, but at a specific range. It'll be hard to find spells that perfectly mimic those AoE type effects specifically, but getting AoE spells just in general is going to be one step closer to being able to do that, rather than just ignoring it and trying to pick up spells that help us be a Gish. We have an intelligence of 16, and we're actually going to want to use it on this build. At level 5, we are Wizard 2, and we now gain our Wizard subclass. We're going to go with Blade Singer. Blade Singer is a nice defensive Gish / melee wizard, because it can give us the Blade Song ability, which allows us to gain a bunch of buffs so long as we're wielding a one-handed weapon, and so long as we're wearing nothing more than light armor. It's also at this time that we probably want to pick up a hand crossbow if we haven't been able to yet, just because the hand crossbow will technically work with the Blade Song ability, but anything that's two-handed isn't going to work. But you could also not use Blade Song all the time. It's a nice buff, that's for sure, but it's often thought of more as like a panic button than as a go-to feature to use right at the beginning of combat. So if we wanted to only use it as a panic button when we're in melee, that works perfectly fine, and then we can switch between melee and range otherwise. Or if you'd rather grab a hand crossbow and keep like a short sword or a rapier in your main hand for melee, then that makes our switching a lot easier. Level 6, we're just up to Wizard 3. We now gain 2nd level wizard spells, so you can pick your favorites of those. Again, keeping in mind what we're trying to look for in terms of AoE or elemental effects. Also, we're a Wizard 3 and a Fighter 3 with Eldritch Knight, meaning that we are the equivalent of a 4th level caster. So even though we just got 2nd level spells, we actually have 3 2nd level spell slots to use. That's pretty nice. At level 7, we are Wizard 4, and here we gain our first ability score increase / feat, and I'm just going to assume that we're increasing an ability score of our choice by +2. I'm going to say Dexterity for the sake of improving our armor class as well as our damage output, but you could choose whatever you'd like. If you find you're focusing more on spells, probably do Intelligence instead, since that does still boost our Blade Song defenses, but realistically there's no real wrong choice. And if you wanted a feat instead, that could work too. Crossbow Expert is a pretty valid option since we want to use a hand crossbow. Just remember that we're going to want to use our bonus action eventually to switch between ranged and melee combat, and Crossbow Expert is a bit of a temptress since that allows us to just shoot with the hand crossbow as a bonus action as well. Mechanically powerful, but not necessarily exactly what we want. At level 8, we are a 5th level wizard, meaning that we are actually a 6th level spellcaster, since we get that extra 1 from being Fighter 3. And that means that we also now gain 3rd level wizard spells. So we're going to gain things like Haste, Fireball, Counterspell, all before we've actually gotten our full combo online, which is a little unfortunate, but we're almost there. I'd recommend Haste for sure, because that's going to be really beneficial to us, as it is a very nice buff spell that also gives us an extra attack, but you could pick any other spells that you would like. At level 9, we are Wizard 6, and here we gain our actual combo feature. We gain the Blade Singer version of extra attack, which says that we can attack twice, and whenever we take the attack action, we can replace one attack with a cantrip. And now normally that could be neat for throwing out a firebolt or a shocking grasp and then doing a weapon attack, but because something like Booming Blade is still a cantrip, that can be used in place of one of these attacks and let us do our full combo. We can now do the following. We can use our cantrip like Booming Blade, then swap to a ranged weapon, such as our hand crossbow, move away from the enemy, and then attack them with our hand crossbow. That means we will have attacked them with our melee weapon, we'll have made it punishing for them to move on their turn, because they'll take damage if they do. We're gonna probably get opportunity attacked when we walk away from them, but assuming we're okay to spend a use of shield, or maybe we have a spell like Blur or Haste up to give us a defensive boost, that hopefully won't actually hit us. And then we're going to attack them again, now from range. Then on the following turn, we can do the exact same thing but in reverse. Assuming the enemy didn't move, they're going to be standing exactly where they were before, so we can just attack them with our hand crossbow from range, we can swap to our melee weapon, we can move up, and we can hit them with Booming Blade again. If they do move at any point in time on their turn between one of those two iterations of our combo, they're going to take more damage from Booming Blade as well. A lot of combat versatility right away, and we want to use this combo as often as possible. Technically, because it's D&D, we could just stand at range and fire with our hand crossbow a bunch of times. Or we could just attack in melee with Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade, and then another attack with our finesse weapon. But ideally, we want to be switching as much as possible to get the actual feel of the Geminate. At level 10, we are now going to stop our wizard levels for a little bit. We'll come back to them eventually, but for right now, we're going to jump back to Fighter. As a Fighter, we are finally Fighter 4, and we get another ability score improvement / feat. I'm just going to say we improve our dexterity again to cap it off at 20, but you could pick another sort of ability score improvement if you wanted, or again, any feat would work really well too. At level 11, we are Fighter 11, and here we gain extra attack, which is completely useless to us because we already got a better version of extra attack from the Blade Singer. Now, I had went up Wizard really quickly to try and get Blade Singer's extra attack as fast as possible, since that's what unlocked our combo. But if you were okay with delaying that combo a little bit longer, we could have swapped the levels around to get this back at actual level 5, and then have used extra attack until we got the Blade Singer's extra attack as a little upgrade. Whichever option you picked, there's no real harm done in how you switch them. It would just change the way we scaled. But since we have a high intelligence, we're probably okay with just relying on spellcasting. We're probably okay with just having relied on spellcasting for a little while until we picked up that Blade Singer extra attack as well. 12, we are Fighter 6, and that means that we gain another ability score improvement / feat. Here I would definitely recommend picking up Crossbow Expert if you haven't already, because then that's going to let us use our hand crossbow and our one-handed finesse melee weapon while we're blade singing to actually get the full effect of all of our features going. But if you did already pick it up, then feel free to increase one of your ability scores by +2, or you could pick up the feat Sharpshooter as well to gain some extra damage on our ranged attacks. There's no real wrong answer. The one thing I would warn about is, again, trying to make it so that we're not incentivizing ranged or melee too much. We want to be actively switching in combat for the Geminate playstyle, so we don't necessarily want to lean into a whole bunch of ranged feats, but vice versa, we don't want to lean into a whole bunch of melee feats either. We want to bounce back and forth and be a full skirmisher all the time. At level 13, we're a Fighter 7, and that means that we gain the War Magic feature from Eldritch Knight. And now, rules as written, this feature is actually completely useless to us, unless your DM is a little nice and allows you to get around it. But here's why. War Magic says that when we use our action to cast a cantrip, we can make one weapon attack as a bonus action. Because we're taking the attack action with Blade Singer, even though we're replacing one of those attacks with a cantrip, we're not using our action to cast that cantrip. So technically, this doesn't really stack too well together. If your DM's nice though, maybe they'll let you proc an extra bonus action attack with this War Magic feature, which would be really awesome because then we could attack as a Blade Singer, use a cantrip, and then use our bonus action to attack one more time. And I know I just said that we wanted to try and be switching as much as possible, which switching requires our bonus action, and we want to feel like a Geminate, but there are turns in Frosthaven where the Geminate doesn't actually switch forms, meaning that if this did work, we could count those as that type of turn. We could do a bunch of melee attacks with Booming Blade and then 2 swings of our weapon, maybe even 3 if we have haste up. Or we could launch a firebolt or some other ranged cantrip at an enemy and then shoot them a bunch of times with our crossbow. Level 14, we're a Fighter 8. We gain another ability score improvement / feat, and at this point it's probably time to start improving our intelligence if you haven't already, given that if we are relying on spells that have attack rolls or use our save DC, we're going to want to improve that. We've probably kind of been able to get away with only a 16 for intelligence, or if you improved it earlier, then that's fine too. But now we definitely want to, so I'm going to assume that we improve our intelligence by +2 to get it to 18. Level 15, we are a Fighter 9, and here we gain Indomitable, which is an okay ability since it lets us reroll one failed saving throw. But generally that might not be the best since we are fairly specialized, in our case, into dexterity and intelligence. So if we end up failing a charisma or strength saving throw, even a reroll might not save us. Level 16, we are Fighter 10, and we now gain Eldritch Strike from the Eldritch Knight. Eldritch Strike says that when we hit a creature with a weapon attack, that creature then has disadvantage on the next saving throw it makes against the spell we cast before the end of our next turn. It doesn't say that it has to be a spell with a spell slot, meaning that thanks to Bladesinger's extra attack, we could hit them with one of our weapon attacks, doesn't matter which, and then instead of casting Booming Blade as our cantrip, we could cast something like Toll the Dead or another spell that requires a saving throw. And since we're also level 16, that is going to be 3d12 in our case, almost going up to 4, about to go up to 4d12 at level 17. That is a lot of damage to deal out, assuming that the enemy will fail their save. On level 17, we are a Fighter 11, and here we're going to end our fighter levels by grabbing extra attack times 2. We can now attack 3 times on our turn when we take the attack action, and yes, we still can replace one of those attacks with a cantrip because Bladesinger's extra attack and Fighter's extra attack do stack together. Because Bladesinger's extra attack and Fighter's extra attack plus do stack together. At level 18, we are a 7th level wizard, and that means that we now have access to 4th level spells. But for spell slots, we have to go back and look at our fighter levels. Well, 11 divided by 3 is an ugly-ish number, but we round down, meaning that it's only going to be the equivalent of a 3rd level spellcaster. If we were to go up to Fighter 12, which you could do, then that would make us a 4th level caster in terms of our fighter levels, and it divides nice and evenly, and we get an extra ability score improvement / feat. So keep that in mind if you'd rather do that. But for us, sticking with Wizard 7, our roughly 3 levels of fighter as a spellcaster makes us a 10th level spellcaster. So we have 5th level spell slots, almost 6th level spell slots to be able to use as well. So definitely upcast any of your favorite spells. Level 19, we are now a Wizard 8, and here we gain another ability score improvement / feat, and it's probably time to cap our intelligence if we hadn't already. Finally, at level 20, we are a 9th level wizard, meaning we have access to 5th level spells, but of course divide our fighter levels by 3 again. It's going to round down to just 3 levels overall. 9 plus 3 is a 12th level spellcaster, meaning we have our full array up to 6th level spell slots. We don't have any major world-breaking spells or anything like that, but we can upcast our favorite spells that we do have to make them a little bit more powerful. So, pick whatever spells you really like. We probably want to have one concentration buff for ourselves, and then we can feel free to launch a few other AoE spells or elemental type spells. It's time to summarize the build. Well, we are definitely the Geminate in terms of their mechanic to be able to switch back and forth between 2 forms. We got that, and we got that in spades, really. We don't actually need to swap forms, but we want to, so we're going to do that as much as possible until we want one round where we pick a form, stick in it, and dish out a bunch of attacks, probably using our action surge to just go absolutely nuts, either at range or in melee. Also, because we're a wizard and we have access to up to 5th level spells, I would hope that we got a lot of our I would hope that we picked up a lot of elemental and AoE type spells to satisfy the theme that the Geminate brings with elements as well as AoE effects. We're not going to be exact there because the Geminate's AoE effects are very weird patterns, and the elements that they generate are generally more like transmogrification. They do generate elements of their own, but they're a lot more adept at taking a certain element and changing it into something else. Because elements work very differently in Gloomhaven and Frosthaven than they do in Dungeons & Dragons, I've always just counted elements as elemental damage types, or spells that feel thematically like that specific element. So a transmogrification in this sense is really hard to do unless you were playing something like a Scribe Wizard. But then we wouldn't get the Bladesinger extra attack. The last regret, which is a really minor one, is our hand size and our stamina. The reason I talk about this is because our Spellweaver class is another class that had an 8-card hand size, meaning that they had very little stamina. And to reflect this, I made them a warlock, even though they might seem more like a wizard in actual Frosthaven. We have the ability to change forms, but it's not like if we stick in one form in particular, we're going to get punished for it. Technically, you could argue there's only so many bolts we have to shoot at range, and also that we only have so much health and we're more likely to get hit in melee. But beyond those restrictions, there's nothing that's really going to be draining for us. It's not the end of the world, it's just a little bit of a regret that we didn't get something to pick that up to make us really feel like the Geminate who has an actual desire to flip as much as possible, so that way they don't get exhausted and effectively die in the scenario too early. Let me know what you thought of the build, or what you would do or change to get closer to the theme of this Gloomhaven character class, as well as anything that you would add in to help us feel like our two forms are fully distinct and different characters, since the Geminate's two forms are supposed to be different personalities. Whether that's mechanical features or role-playing theme, it would be interesting to see how we could approach those two identities in one form. Thank you so much for coming on the journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.